this fact that the sun is always there and it's so strong, and we're all like dependent on it, and it's like way bigger than us. No one can own the sun. Now some companies have all the power to power. And what if you can generate it yourself? You have more independence, but at the same time, it also allows communities and connection.
I'm Lauren Salenza, a Seattle-based writer and software designer, and I write Tech Without Losing Your Soul, a newsletter blending personal narrative and reporting to challenge unsustainable ideas about innovation and explore what it means to stay human and reclaim our agency in an era of AI, rising inequality, and environmental distress. This is an interview with Marjan van Aubel, a designer who is building an entirely new discipline and new technology around the oldest energy source in the universe, the sun. Her work reimagines how solar energy shows up in our daily lives, not as utility hardware, but as product innovations, light installations, and solar art. Her pieces are in the permanent collections at the Museum of Modern Art in New York, the V&A in London, and Stedelijk Museum in Amsterdam, among many other museums across the world. She's collaborated with companies like Lexus, Cause, Timberland, and Swarovski with the aim of accelerating this energy transition. And she's also the co-founder of the Solar Movement and Solar Biennale. And she's also the author of the book, Solar Futures, How to Design a Post-Fossil World with the Sun. I met Marjan in Germany at the Beyond Tellerrand conference, where we both gave individual talks to an audience of about 500 designers, technologists, and business leaders across Europe. And her perspective and aesthetic stood out immediately, as her work seeks to reconnect us to the natural world. And I couldn't wait to invite her in for a deeper one-on-one conversation. Together, we unpack how a technocratic perspective anchored on efficiency and payback time is actually holding solar energy back. And we talk about what we can learn from integrating biomimicry into our work, or the practice of studying nature to solve human problems and create sustainable technologies. On her website, Marjan writes, "Instead of looking down into the earth for oil and gas, let's start looking up to the sky for energy." Marjan, thank you so much for being here. You know, it was so great to meet you at Beyond Tellerrand in Germany. And I was just so fascinated by your work, what you're really doing and how you're pushing solar energy forward in a number of different ways. How did you get into that particular type of work? And what does it mean to be a solar designer?
Nice question. Like, how I got into this is basically just follow my intuition. I always had this like fascination with solar energy, and I can't explain you why this is. It's like the sun hits a surface, something happens, and then you have energy, and you don't have to do anything for it. So I always thought that was fascinating and stuff. And it's very technical, yes. But then when I was studying at the Royal College of Art, I was writing my thesis about the future of color. And then I found these solar cells that use the properties of colors to generate a current. And they were not the blue or the black ones that we all know, but they were colorful, transparent, and yeah, you could design with it. So for me, that was for the first time like, wow, this is like something else. The professor Michael Gretzel in Switzerland, he invented this technology, and it's like basically similar to like photosynthesis in plants, where the green chlorophyll converts light into sugar. These cells convert light into energy. I was really first making that cells by hand with mixing blueberries, juice and stuff. So it started kind of like a fascination and kind of scientific. I went to the lab, and then it kind of like, from there, this world of like solar energy, all these different possibilities starting opening up. It's physics, it's working with colors. It's like this world I didn't know anything about, and that was mind-blowing. Yeah, we can learn so much from nature just by looking around, and there's so many things we don't know. Seeing where solar energy is now, and when I was studying it, it's like a couple of years ago, it was kind of like so like bulky and things, and so like nearly untouchable. You can't change that. And suddenly I had this feeling like, hey, I can do something myself here. It's just like tangible. I can make it and work with people. So it was a completely opposite approach of like how solar energy is and was at the time.
Yeah, and along those lines, actually, of the opposite approach, on your website, I'm going to quote something that you wrote, which is, and I love this, "Our Earth constantly receives an abundance of solar energy. But until now, the conversation around solar energy has always remained very technical and economic. And you write that this technocratic perspective based on efficiency and payback time leaves no room for human and cultural values, limiting social acceptance and the full potential of solar energy. But meanwhile, solar energy is becoming like the cheapest source of energy. Since 1958, the price of solar energy has dropped enormously. And so now is the time to make room for more engaged, meaningful, and emotional relationships with it. As you're thinking about that perspective, what do you think gets lost when we only talk about solar in terms of efficiency and payback time? Like, how is that technocratic framing actually holding solar back?
Well, it's interesting because we only ask about efficiency and payback time when we talk about solar energy. When you buy a car, no one's asking you like, what's the efficiency of your car, Because it's became the cheapest source of energy. It's no longer, we don't no longer have to focus on just that.
Yeah. And I feel like, as a designer myself, I think a lot about how we have to connect to human and cultural values in order to discern how a new technology or an ancient technology like solar energy is going to fit or integrate into our day-to-day lives. Otherwise, people aren't going to adopt it. And so I think when we abandon how people live, what their values are, how culture is changing, we don't just lose the aesthetics, but we lose adoption. We lose how people actually use it in their day-to-day. So if we're only focusing on efficiency or only focusing on payback time or letting that be the sole drivers of this, we lose, I think, so much in terms of how we can actually change our day-to-day lives in a way that's better for the planet.
Exactly, because we're not going to change the energy system just with numbers and also a bit out of guilt, because now it's okay, you need to produce this and this and this, or it's a lot of must and guilt. And if it's something you want to be surrounded with, or like a new car or something, it's okay, yes, it drives you from A to B, but most people have a connection with a car. I gave my car a name.
Yeah.
My old car was called Ralph. I don't know why. No. So it's this personal relationship is very important because you want to take care of it. You want to make sure it's okay, and maybe I need to go to the car wash or something because it's there are people that's their lifestyle,
Mm-hmm.
And what if that solar energy can be a lifestyle or something? It's not oh yeah, well, look at this 4 solar panels I got on my roof, but more it's so integrated and so part of our everyday life that it really becomes more cultural, something you're really proud of.
One thing that struck me in your talk at Beyond Tellerrand was that you mentioned, and I actually didn't know this, you mentioned that the first solid-state solar cell was installed on a rooftop in New York City in 1884 by inventor Charles Fritz. And yet, this is 1884 this happened. And yet, right around that same time, that was when the U.S. and Europe pivoted hard toward oil, toward gas, kind of establishing the entrenched energy systems that we're still very much dependent on today. When you're designing with solar energy, when you're advocating for solar energy against that history, do you ever have to guard against feelings of futility or doubt? How do you hold on to hope given what you're going up against?
Yeah, that's constantly, it's constantly have to fight that. And you have to fight against these big systems, and they don't want you. They don't want you to exist. They don't want you to do whatever you're doing. Throughout history, it's very interesting to see that how politics influenced the development of solar energy. Okay, there was a space race. Things needed to go into space. Okay, then there was suddenly a lot of budget to put in the innovation and development of solar energy because you can't have heavy batteries on satellites. Even a change of presidents, then the development and all the money stopped. You can see it now. Very depressing and hard, but at the same time it also gives you a lot of motivation to keep on going because this fact that the sun is always there and it's so strong and we're all dependent on it and it's way bigger than us. We need her strength, and the most important thing is that the people that work in this industry and passionate about solar energy, they are the best people. Seriously, they want to share, they want to, so proud of what they're doing, and it's that is so amazing as well. When you're in doubt, you just talk to your community. Yeah, we were planning a 3rd solar biennial in the U.S., for example, and then we actually cancelled it because we're the politics, climate wasn't looking very good at. Still isn't very good, but at the same time the sort of community in New York said this also gives a lot of strength to keep on fighting against this. So it's a bit you think there's a big no, but we keep our fire in a way.
As someone who lives in the US, when I am traveling in Europe or Asia and I see all the different conferences or festivals going on, I get sad a little bit because I'm like, I want to bring this to the US, but there's so much that's difficult right now. And yet I feel like there's so many people in the US who want this, be connected to the world in this way. And it's so difficult right now to make that happen. I have hope that it will happen eventually again, and it is happening in pockets here and there. So I really love that you made that point about community, because I think it's something that it's easy to take for granted sometimes, but it really is, I think, the foundation for like doing this really difficult work. So going into your work, I'd love to talk more about how you really like approach designing for like a meaningful emotional relationship with solar energy. And you have a lot of different projects that do this. When you're starting a new project, does the energy output or the human experience of that piece come first?
Well, it's not particularly that it's like, okay, this needs to have this and this and this output. That's like, again, this very technical approach.
Yes.
Of course, the project needs to make sense. So if I'm developing, for example, a light, it needs to get enough power to function, you know? So with Sana, which I started as a Kickstarter, because living in the city, I could see that a lot of people couldn't have access to solar panels on the roof because they didn't own their house. I was living in Amsterdam at the time. A lot of buildings are monuments, so then you're not allowed to have solar panels. How can you bring solar energy then closer to the people in your home without like sort of installing these big systems and going to this difficult route? So kind of like a sort of step in between. And that was like the idea of Sana, to have a sort of self-powering solar light that also gives you this relationship with the sun. It really mimics sunlight, it works on sunlight, and it really gives you this connection with nature and the sun.
I love that you like flipped my question. Like, it's not about output, which is so funny because I even have to check my own bias and technocratic perspective that's like embedded within me. So I love that you pivoted that question. How do we start with nature first? How do we like experience that, reflect in that, observe it, and let that present itself to us? I think that's what I'm hearing from this, which is beautiful and something that's not often, thought about in a lot of technology today.
Yeah, it's really to bring this awareness, because in a city with a lot of buildings, we kind of like lost that connection so much.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, I even think about when I'm in a city, the light pollution, like I don't have access as much to the stars in the night sky.
And it's amazing that in the past we used to like navigate through with the stars and like look at the time, the sun. Now it's just like, how do I find this? Okay, you look it up, or you ask.
Yeah. Right. You use technology, you use Google Maps, you use whatever to like figure it out, but you're not using nature anymore to do that. Yeah. Man. So let's talk about Current Window, which is a modern take on stained glass, using the properties of color to harvest energy from daylight, which can then be used to power appliances indoors. When you shared this project at Beyond Tellerrand, I loved it because you talked about how the glass pieces are made of dye-sensitized solar cells, which use the properties of color to create that electric current. And what's really cool here is there's biomimicry here. The technique is based on photosynthesis in plants, similar to the green chlorophyll that absorbs light. The colored window glass harnesses the energy. I think it's a really beautiful demonstration of how we can leverage solar energy in our day-to-day life. And, you've spoken about how a building maybe shouldn't be considered fully functional if it doesn't generate its own energy. Mm-hmm. And I think Current Window starts to make that real, with every window becoming like its own power source. So how far are we from that being standard in architecture from what you can see?
Very far. To become standard in architecture, that's like quite far away, but it is starting to happen. Current Window is kind of like a bit of an older project, but finally I get like approached by architects like, hey, can we collaborate together? It's like, but it's great. Yeah, that's it's amazing, but it took a while, I have to say. And it's also like when something is like inactive or active, now a window becomes like, you can see through it, but it's also a power source, it's like it either do nothing or it gives you power. Everything is like possible now. It's just the adaptation is so slow, and that has a lot of reasons, like of course the price curve. And so we need more of these examples, and then it becomes more mainstream, and then it's become standard. But
we're still very far. Yeah. Because those examples, I think they show like they're like experiments. This is something that we can test out. What would it be to actually place this in more buildings? And that's super cool to create.
And I think now what would change it is like big statements projects, like if Google would sort of like have their offices with this like Current Windows, and it's like other companies see that, then you get this follow effect, and then things will start to happen. But if even Google doesn't have these current windows,
what are we to do? Yeah. Yeah. Well, let's shift gears into a piece you did actually for a company, which is 8 minutes and 20 seconds, named for the time it takes sunlight to reach the Earth's surface. 8 minutes and 20 seconds is a reimagination of Lex's future zero emission catalyst, sparking new electrified experiences. And you did this, I think, in collaboration with Random Studio. And the installation transforms the concept car into a static and dynamic framework designed with organic, transparent photovoltaic sheets. Powered by sunlight instead of traditional fuel, each transparent solar cell contributes to a beautiful interplay of light and patterns, evoking a sense of motion. So how did this partnership with Lexus come about? Like, did they come to you? Did you pitch it to them? How did this happen?
It's funny like how some things started, because I've written a book, Solar Futures, and then one of the interviews was Paola Antonelli, the creator of MoMA, and she introduced me to Lexus for a Lexus Design Award. And then I was like a mentor of a super cool program, and basically then I was on their radar. And from that, they approached me to do a project with them. Organic photovoltaics are basically very thin sheets of PET plastic, and they're like printed in between them. It's like a sort of inkjet printer. You can print whatever shape, whatever color you would like. And then you have this like thin, flexible cell basically. And that's why for facades, for windows, this is kind of like the application where they developed it for. It's so lightweight. I mean, when I first saw it, I was like, this cannot be a solar cell. This is incredible. So it works completely the opposite, not opposite, but very different than sort of the standard solar cells that we know.
There's also this really cool component to the piece where it's designed for exploration from all different angles, and it responds as people move around it. These motion sensors activate the LED panels as visitors pass by, creating this ripple effect through the gradient colors and accompanied by a gentle interactive soundscape. I think what's really fascinating here is that you're asking people to move around the piece to activate it versus just staring at it. The viewer's body becomes part of the energy cycle. And I think there's something really interesting about a solar powered piece that only fully comes alive when a human being is present. Was that like a deliberate statement that you wanted to make? Like, how did you land on that as an interaction model?
Yeah, like what you said, is like sometimes when you're standing in front of a piece, you're like looking at it and you're like, oh, these are solar panels. Oh, okay. You know, and that's the reaction sometimes. And if you really becomes like part of it, you know, even like how the sheets were placed, it's also like, it's like a bit like a hologram. So from a couple of directions, you couldn't see anything. And when you move around, the car became visible. And also they had the sensor, so you're really like surprised, like, hey, if I'm doing something here, then this is happening. So you start to have like sort of like a conversation, a dialogue, a play with the piece. And then I think already that like trigger, this imagination and this connection makes you become more interesting. Like, hey, this is solar powered. Oh, cool. And then you want to slowly get it into the story.
Let's talk about Solar Pavilion, because that's also a very interactive piece. And that sort of is the concluding element of the Solar Biennale, which is an event and movement towards the solar-powered future, as we talked about before. You know, you wrote that like a solar blanket, the Solar Pavilion harvests the sun energy, and then that's used to spread the sun's heat in the dark space under the solar blanket using infrared radiation. This piece is so fascinating because I think people's image of solar is this rigid panel, these very sharp geometric shapes bolted to a roof, and here you're actually creating this curved fluid blanket. What did it feel like to actually like stand under it and witness people's reactions to something like that?
Well, the nicest thing was actually to stand in it and on it, because there was a staircase you can climb onto, and you basically could stand in the middle of this like blanket shape. So you really could have like a different perspective on the solar cells. You could really see them up close. Because otherwise it's just like far away, again, like how solar panels are now. Oh, they're somewhere on this roof. I worked with this together with V8 architects. Below you basically saw like the black panels and like the wires and stuff that was all very visible. So it became like that underneath kind of like technical. And then when you're up, you're like, hey, this is what's up here, basically.
See, I really want to be able to see this in person so that I can kind of go through all the different angles for it. Because when I'm looking at the photographs, I'm like, oh, I want to be underneath it. But what you're describing is like, no, there's above, there's sideways, there's all these different angles in which you can experience it. And I think that's also an aspect of being in sunlight, all the different angles and ways in which the sun transitions across the day.
And what was also nice was because it was like the closing act or like the closing week of the Solar Biennial. So we had a lot of programming inside the pavilion. So we created this like big circle of 10 meters and that moved during the Biennale through all the location. And then it was like laid down as kind of like a stage, but also like a meeting place because it was like a round circle. So we had like dances, there was music, there were talks. There was like on all levels, there were things happening.
Where is the next Solar Biennale going to be?
That's a good question. I'm fingers crossed for Japan. We have a different conversation with different countries, and Japan is now the most likely, but it's not confirmed yet.
So when you were creating this, you co-founded this actually with your colleague Pauline, and you wrote that this was really about having an event that's dedicated to shifting the cultural narrative around solar energy. And you've mentioned that it's not just art installations, but there's festival, there's community. When you were creating it, like what was the gap that you saw that a Biennale could fill that a conference couldn't?
Because it has so many different aspects, conference always attracts a certain type of people. To reach different audiences, we also needed to have different events for that. So we had like talks and like a seminar for the EU and like policymakers. And then we had events for students, then there were events for people in the neighborhoods, events for design public and an exhibition. For everyone kind of like that was like related, there was a place where people could meet. And also the link with design and solar was never been made before. So
yeah,
like most people, like solar energy, what is that? I've been to a lot of conferences on solar energy. It's like very technical, but it's never been as fun and like colorful as the Solar Biennial.
Yeah, when I see pictures of it, it's like people are outside, right? They're walking around, they're moving their bodies, they're talking with one another. And usually when you see conference photos, sometimes it's like you're inside, seems kind of stale, or like the audience is like sitting down and just looking at the stage of one person, right? Yeah. What would happen if we just changed the shape of that, took it outside, and then allowed us to reconnect to nature through these like experiences of solar energy versus like this very technical presentation of it? That's what's really inspiring, not just for, I think, solar energy, but for all kinds of disciplines right now. Are the conferences in our industry even interesting anymore? Like, how do we actually break that paradigm a bit and have people engage with each other a little bit more? Just be able to step outside of the way in which we've always been doing this. Even something like a Solar Biennale is like inspiration for something like that. And I would love to see more of that kind of, shift in the way that we come together in our various, disciplines and industries, be more connected to nature, be more connected to each other. And I think that that's really cool that you're doing that. And I just want to like bring that forward as like an example of what we could do. And I really do hope it comes to the U.S. When it does, let me know. And I will be there, although I do want to come to the Japan one too when it happens. Let's talk about The Sun, My Heart. It's an evocative installation synchronizing people's hearts with solar rhythms. And it was showcased during the London Design Festival in 2024. So this invites visitors to engage with a sensor that responds to their touch, allowing them to create a personalized sun experience through a dynamic display of shifting colors. And this experience is a constellation of 77 sunlights that mimic the sun's daily cycle, and it's complemented by a soundscape based on NASA's solar recordings. And so this immersive experience triggers the brain's theta waves, the same theta waves that are produced during deep relaxation, and invites reflection as it's doing that. When you're thinking about a piece like this, especially a piece that invites reflection about our relationship with the sun and solar energy's potential, I'd love to ask you, like, how has working closely with solar energy changed your own relationship to sunlight? And because I could imagine that you maybe go into these projects with one idea and then you come out on the other end with like, oh, wait a minute. Now my own perspective is shifted about this. And so I'd love to hear more about that.
The light is different all the time. It's never constant. What I love about living here in Italy, you really can see how the light's changing during the day. And also in summer and winter and stuff. I became much more aware of that and also find it like so beautiful. And it's like, I can just sometimes just watch the light and just enjoy it so much.
This actually brings me to my next question that's related. I've been really into NASA's latest Artemis 2 mission that they did back in April. And I think they asked Christina, one of the astronauts on that mission, what's something that we take for granted? And the first thing she said was blue sky. Having the ability to look at a sky and like see the sun in that way. That takes me to my next question, which is related to sort of space as a metaphor here, which is that when we were both at the Beyond Teleran conference, you gave a talk about the sun. I gave a talk about the moon, those light and shadows. Why I say this is I think you and I were actually communicating the same thing, which is that there's no light without darkness. You have to sort of sit in the tension between those two things to really understand, how do I create a piece that's going to be meaningful with solar energy, knowing, the difficult history that we've been through. Or even when I'm, as a software designer, creating new technology, I'm thinking, how can we test this at smaller scales first, listen to people in their context first so we can understand those consequences, not just the capabilities, the light and the shadow. What does it mean for your work to sit in that tension, to be someone whose practice is about light, while also making space for what the darkness of our history, reveals, the century that we've spent looking down into the earth for oil and gas and everything that has cost us?
It gives me also like a lot of motivation, to be honest, to do things differently. I mean, I'm trained as a designer. Just making design for design and making beautiful things wasn't also like fulfilling, because you see the world and it's like, not in a good state. And to be able to like do something with design, because design is for me something very positive, hopeful, and you're creating something new for a future that doesn't exist, and you can make up this future. So it is positive in my mind, at least, because otherwise what's the point of life if there's no hope? So that gives me like a drive to not be like just being depressed and like non-active and like, okay, it's a very glooming situation in this darkness. For me, like creating something, working with design, finding, even though they're tiny, but they can have a big impact, these light sources, these points of like hope.
It's a gift to people. Because of all this darkness, the light can shine even brighter, and that's a gift that you're giving to people. And that's where I feel motivated too, is like, how can I first find hope within myself, but then also offer that to other people? And that gives me a sense of aliveness, right?
Exactly,
that like nothing else really can. Looking ahead, and the things that you're motivated by right now, like you've built installations, you've written a book, you co-founded the Biennale, you've collaborated with global brands. You've also started with something called the Solar Academy. So I'd love to hear more about that. Like, what is the Solar Academy, and why was education the next, frontier for you?
One is like, because I get this question a lot, like, how do I become a solar designer? And I'm just like, you can read my book, but it's like not really giving you the answers. And I have been giving quite some workshops about solar design, and it's always quite a specific topic, but the dream is that solar design becomes like its own discipline. It's like you have automotive design, and then you have solar design that really thinks about like, where does our energy come from? And it's really at the core of its design, because if it does in design in the future doesn't generate its own energy, we will consider it as not functional or broken. Solar design can be also, doesn't have to be only like technical, but it can be working with the sun, this awareness, and like it's quite like large. Framing this discipline needs an academy, and the dream is to like have a master somewhere at some point that you really go and study and you get your diploma in solar design. But we will do it in different steps, and like for example, the first Solar Academy workshop will be in Bois-Bichet in France this summer, and then from then we will have like workshops and like expand the curriculum.
Amazing. And what happens in these workshops?
The first thing is like, solar panels don't have to be blue, they can be whatever, and then you already spark the imagination of a lot of designers. So what can you do? How can we design this future then? I think that's like one of the main goals of like, what can we do to like change this narrative?
I love that, because it's like helping them access their imagination as well, because it's like we have access to this solar energy, but we also live in a world that it's not fully integrated yet. So we have to activate our imagination to see how that could start to be fully integrated and change that narrative. That's a practice of imagination, and something that's, I think, being lost right now in a world that has a highly technocratic, efficient, let me just outsource to AI for a lot of this. The fact that we can actually leverage these sort of workshops around solar energy also as a practice of imagination is really cool too. Do you see it as that as well?
Yeah, because like technical, you can look everything up. It's easy to like find like how to do this. There are like amazing blogs on like how to fix this and how to create this. But it's like that in combination with imagination is, I think, is what's missing, and that's what's needed.
Well, beyond the Solar Academy, what's on the horizon for you right now? Like, what are you working on or thinking about right now that you're most excited about?
Well, it's like a couple of things. It's more architectural projects to really integrate into like big buildings and more outdoor solar installations. But also working a bit less with technology, but really like working with moonlight.
Ooh.
And sunlight that changes color. And not only like sort of always the technical, I have to work with wires and like, PCBs and systems and sensors, but also sometimes just nice I'm a designer, to see light changing in a material, for example.
And you're also, I think you have an active exhibit right now in Japan, I saw.
Yeah, that's true. Basically, we have an agent in Japan now, and they're introducing my work there with the idea of like having more permanent installations in Japan.
Nice. Well, let me leave you with this one last question. Speaking of imagination, when you imagine a world beautifully and fully integrated with solar energy, what do you see?
Well, things are more equal because the sun is for everyone. No one can own the sun. I would see a way more like community-friendly world. Maybe it's like a new currency. It's like something that is in abundance and we can share, and inclusive as well. So it's not like now some companies have all the power to power. And what if you can generate it yourself? You have more independence, but at the same time, it also allows communities and connection.